Welcome to MacroEdge Radio. Please note that the content aired on this program is intended strictly for entertainment and educational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or professional advice. The opinions, discussions, and views expressed by our contributors, guests, and associated MacroEdge staff are their own and do not necessarily represent the official stance, strategy, or opinions of the MacroEdge organization or any of its affiliates. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, MacroEdge Radio makes no representation or warranties of any kind expressed or implied about the completeness, accuracy, reliability, suitability, or availability of the content of this show. Any reliance you place on such information is therefore strictly at your own risk. We do not endorse or assume responsibility for the accuracy or reliability of any information offered by third-party websites linked through the show or any website or feature linked in any banner or other advertising. We will not be a party to or in any way be responsible for monitoring any transaction between you and any third-party providers of products or services. All audio content of MacroEdge Radio is the intellectual property of the MacroEdge organization, and any use, reproduction, or redistribution of this content without the express written consent of the MacroEdge organization is strictly prohibited. All rights reserved. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to MacroEdge Radio. It is Friday, June 21st, 2024. This is John Galt speaking for the MacroEdge team. I have to tell you, we are in what's called a summer lull, except for today was anything but a lull with all the news being dumped out early, late, and after the market close, of course. Events across the board that are somewhat insane. We're seeing a new trend here of trying to bury the turd in the cat box, so to speak. For those of you who owned a cat, you understand what I'm saying. And unfortunately, we're witnessing it every day, every time we see the news headlines, and they immediately shift to NVIDIA, Apple, et cetera, et cetera. It's a constant theme on any of the business networks, any of the business radio networks, any television show you watch, including the local news sometimes. Don't pay attention to the reality. Look at what is occurring in the big picture. Folks, this is unbelievable. I'm going to start with a market summary before I begin this rant. We're going to talk banks. We're going to talk a lot about extortion. We're going to talk a little real estate. We're going to talk a little transportation. Hey, our friends at the Federal Reserve and FDIC, retail, maybe a little bit of the big rat, and the big threat hanging over next week's trading that no one wants to talk about heading into July 4th. Number one, the Dow finished at 39,150, S&P 54,64, NASDAQ 17,899. This was a quad witching day for expiration at options. It was a bigger deal than it looks like, although the technicals were sort of meh at best. Advanced declines 1440 to 1353 New York. NASDAQ 2190 to 2091. 7.2 billion shares in the New York. 9.2 billion shares in the NASDAQ. New highs, new lows. 40 new highs in the New York. 51 new lows. 48 new highs in the NASDAQ, 151 new lows on the, new highs on the NASDAQ. Not a good picture, not a good breakdown, and it's not one of those breadth charts that you want to sit there and send home to mom. Gold down $34.25 to finish the week at $23.3475. Silver down $1.24 to $29.58. Still range bound, still stuck, still waiting for some sort of event, financial or otherwise, to jar it back into the upward trend and stay in it. Dr. Copper is not supporting any such move, down another 13 cents to 4.43. The reason that's important is Dr. Copper might be indicating a change in the economy, as is lumber down another 4% today to 4.54. The reason that's important is the Fed's not doing anything to make it stronger. They're basically just letting everyone else. Oh, someone says my mic just died. Let me try it real quick. Maybe it is him. I am still here as far as I can tell, and I can still see myself going here. So let's get Mr. Awesome on here with me. Hopefully he can hear me. Folks, I don't know if my mic died or not. I'm still here. It died for a minute, but it's back. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I don't know what the heck's going on with this thing. Sometimes this whole X thing works different. I wear a headset when I'm doing this, and it makes it a little bit trickier than doing it just through your phone. I don't like the echo effects. And the desktop, for some reason, it does not stay on consistently. Don't ask me to explain it. I would just like Elon to fix it and set it up to a more traditional broadcasting type format where you just plug and play. All right. back to the dollar strengthening. The dollar has been strengthening because the rest of the world's falling apart. And usually what happens is when the rest of the world's economies are deteriorating, we're the last in line to get the major impact of that, and we're about to see that. Even Bitcoin took a hit. It went down as low as in the 62,000 range, bounced back up to 64,256 with the usual retail speculation. What you need to pay attention to in the markets, in my opinion, today, and I'll have some of our guys join us and talk about this, you will notice that this kind of distribution where selling is occurring in large individual candles or moments within the market, minute, 5 minute, etc., this kind of sales volume is not mom and pop retail. Now, I often joke that retail is the bag holder, and they are. You're the last ones in and the last ones out. You pay the highest price for an equity, and most people in retail pay the lowest price, exiting out, taking massive losses. The big stock of the talk is NVIDIA, of course, after it's split. Reached a high just above $140 this week. Closed the week down another 3% today at $126.50. So we are officially in quote-unquote correction mode from its all-time high of this week, with 559 million shares changing hands. That ain't Mom Pa Kettle's 401k making a trade. And that's what everyone needs to be aware of. This kind of volume is indicative of big players taking their profits and going home for the summer. Apple in the same situation, down 1.04% today on 236 million shares. And one company that has been selling Apple at its peak stands out in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm not saying they did it. I can't prove it. But it certainly is suspicious the minute that they announce they're doing a share buyback and they're heading up to new highs, suddenly there's large blocks of stock exiting out, bailing, pulling your ripcord, and boom, going right back into cash. Now, I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here because someone was talking about what has been going on in the markets with what happened after Obama took over from George W. Bush. And folks, the media gave Obama a pass. When he ran for office, he promised prosecutions for the banks and those individuals responsible for the shenanigans, shall we say, the polite way of phrasing it, and nothing happened. No one went to jail. No one was prosecuted. There were no regulatory changes of any consequence to the big boys. Dodd-Frank was a complete joke unless you're a small bank or unless you want to see what happens when we have a bail-in. Where do we see that, boys and girls? The reality is they covered it up from 2009 to 2011. Some of the phrases that we heard in the news, and I still have records of this from my old radio days. Fun employment. How many remember fun employment? That was a great term. It's fun to be unemployed. I can learn how to play the guitar or the saxophone or even the flute. There's nothing going on in real estate now but a market adjustment. Meanwhile, foreclosures peaked in the first year of the Obama administration. A lot of foreclosures were held off to after the election. And during the election, after the election in 2009, 2010, they slammed as many through as they could to get prime properties. Weird how a lot of the institutions that bought a lot of real estate in this cycle were the same ones that were buying real estate when it was foreclosed on and crashed in the last one. And the last one, my favorite phrase of them all, very prominent in 2010, it was not a bailout because the banks had to pay everything back. Bunk. Yeah, we paid it back. We paid it back in higher fees and permanent APRs on lower and middle class credit cards north of 21%, even when rates were at zero. True ZERP. The big story in the background, though, was the banks. And the banks are really playing a game right now. We have this story from Yahoo Finance and all over the media. The Federal Reserve and FDIC determined that there was a shortcoming, quote-unquote, in the plan submitted in 2023 by J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, and Citigroup. If those names sound familiar, they are the exact same people who were involved in some of the shenanigans of 2008, 2007, 2006, 2000, etc. A shortcoming, according to agencies, is a weakness that raises questions about the feasibility of their plan. Where the two regulators disagreed was concerning the severity of weakness in the plan submitted by Citigroup. The FDIC said it found the bank's plan weak enough to be considered a more serious deficiency, while the Fed stuck with a less severe shortcoming rating. Now, of course, the Federal Reserve is not going to give a negative rating to one of its member banks on the board of directors. Just not going to happen, folks. Just face reality. But there is a risk in the background that we're not talking about, and it's the 800-pound gorilla in the room that is smoking your cigars, drinking your scotch, and laughing every time you think that things are starting to get better. Reuters, June 20th. U.S. big banks face growing spillover risks from non-banks. Oh, wait a minute. I thought this was contained. As Daniel DiMartino Booth pointed out tonight, the non-banking sector globally is about $240 trillion. The traditional banking sector, about $180 trillion. Well, with all of the financial instruments that we're playing with and the various financing games, do we really know how bad the problem is in the non-bank sector? Well, the FDIC and Federal Reserve are going to start revealing that next week, conveniently the week before a holiday, and we're going to sit there and roll through this story real quick. Non-bank financial institutions pose an increasing risk to America's big banks, economists said on Thursday in a post on the New York Fed's Liberty Street Economics blog. How many of you heard massive discussions by Steve Leisman, Mike McKee, and the various individuals on television about that story? 2 minutes? 4 minutes? 5 minutes maybe? During times of heightened market-wide stress, demands for liquidity mount on banks as non-banks seek term loans and lines of credit. This escalating reliance on big banks could result in vectors of shock transmission and amplification, forcing authorities to intervene and do so en masse, the researcher said in the post, adding that the extent of these market disruptions could be rather severe. When they say rather severe, I am referring to the severity of far past 2008 levels. Unlike large banks, non-banks operate under less restrictive regulatory regimes and monitoring standards. See, what they don't want to say is the word private equity. They don't want to talk about private individuals. You know, if I decide to loan someone money, okay, I'm not a bank, but I'm a non-bank, and if it's $1 million, okay, that's a substantial sum. There's going to be questions asked, but as long as I'm doing it through a contractual obligation above ground, no big deal. Well, we're talking tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars at play. And it is a dark pool. Just like the speculation you heard on the movie The Big Short. It's a dark pool. They set the prices. They set the premiums. The growing bank and non-bank interconnectedness means that risks used to lie solely with big banks are now being repackaged between banks and non-banks. The blog authors estimate the correlation of bank and non-bank risk has steadily risen from about 65% prior to the 2008 financial crash to upwards of 80% now. Yes, I do love my paper crumbling, and yes, I do have a printer that runs on Infinity ink. Well, at least for now it does. That's the cost, the risk that we're facing, folks. That's where we have to be concerned. This is why I am somewhat worried about where we're going here, kids, because this does not look good in the long term. And in the short term, the headlines I'm about to recite to you are not indicative of a growing or expanding economy at some of the rates that they're talking about. For example, a crisis for those of us that cook with Mexican food, 400% increase in cilantro prices. What? Well, that's from Bloomberg. I was just going to give you the answer that you heard in Colorado and California. Grow your own. Avocados have been cut off from Mexico due to an inspector disappearing inside of Mexico, and we have cut off imports from Mexico. The guacamole shortage is real. FreightWaves was reporting on that this week. Disney workers, the big rat makes the news again, sues the company for falsely inducing them to move to Florida, according to the Associated Press. Yes, these people were too stupid to see that Florida is hot, Florida has snakes and alligators, and Florida has freedom. The next story headline. This one is of interest because it hits the retail and commercial real estate sector across both. Big Lots issues going concern warning from the Retail Dive. And I will post all of these up in the MacroEdge Radio theme after the show. And, of course, my favorite one for the night, hitting retail and the consumer. The ILA, International Longshoremen's Association, issues a strike warning due to a breach of contract over automation issues introduced at West and East Coast ports and threatens to strike all United States ports if resolution is not sought and concluded by September 30th of this year. What could possibly go wrong if we have a strike at the same time we have peak importation of Christmas goods? I mean, this is very easy to see. And it's a crisis that no one wants to talk about because, let's just assume they're going to fall in line and make sure Biden gets reelected. I really think at this point in time some of the unions and labor in general is tired of the high prices, tired of the promises, tired of the politics, and will do whatever they want to do to preserve themselves, especially in this economic situation. The big story of the week that's hiding behind everything else, unfortunately, appears to be CDK. For those of you who are not familiar with that company, it is a software company that provides a cloud-based service for dealer management systems for the automotive dealers. About 15,000 car dealerships have been impacted by this nationwide. It impacted across the entire operating system, parts, service, new car receipts, new car sales, used car purchases, used car sales. And one estimate I heard from a dealer online, and I don't know if this is true, but it could have that kind of impact. It could reach an impact of up to $10 billion a day. I'm a little skeptical of that figure, but we'll roll with it for now when you take it across everything that's involved and the fact that they're going to pen and paper to process transactions. It could get time-consuming and quite costly. Well, the CDK hack, after hours tonight, at 5:32 p.m., to be exact, Bloomberg, a group that claims to have hacked CDK Global, a software provider to thousands of car dealerships in North America, has demanded tens of millions of dollars in ransom, according to a person familiar with the matter. The hacking group is believed to be based in Eastern Europe, they said. The discussions are fluid and the situation could change. This is a $1.2 trillion industry in the United States. And if they don't figure out how to resolve this, we could see a major impact, believe it or not, on GDP from a ransomware attack. Before anyone says, well, that's crazy, remember, United Health paid a $22 million extortion fee. Clorox paid. Numerous companies are being hacked, and they're being hacked in their most vulnerable systems, despite the fact that they've been warned for decades to quit skimping on computer security. Cybersecurity is critical in this environment. And if anybody thinks our utilities are isolated and safe like the government claims, they're nuts. But for the automotive industry, this is huge. If they can't move the vehicles, the problems we're seeing, and I'm going to read some headlines off Automotive News because that really will blow your mind. Stellantis signals more job cuts ahead and cost reduction crusade. Bad situation. General Motors overhauls ad agency roster. CarMax Q1 net income falls 33% to $152 million. Revenue slips 7.5%. Are you noticing a trend? A weakening car market because of interest rates. The EV industry imploding. EV buyers are now expressing great remorse in buying an EV because of the hassle of the recharge situation, the lack of free charging stations where you can just drive up, plug it in, put your credit card in, pay, and go. Everyone is finding out this is not a rosy environment. And then the quality issues are also hitting home for automotive in America. We're getting smoked. And China has already, believe it or not, is exporting more cars globally than the American auto industry. We have refused to conform to the needs of the global market, so they're going for cheaper and sacrificing some quality with China, because let's face it, we don't know the quality of Chinese vehicles. We're not able to experience or do any kind of purchase evaluations inside the U.S. You have to go there to do that. That should be enough of a warning of where we're at. And we could risk losing more of the global market if we don't pay attention. Before I bring on some more of MacroEdge Team. I'm going to bring Ulysses Awesome on here in a minute, but I got to say, there's one warning. This will be my final shredding of the paper for the night. One warning you're going to have to pay attention to, folks. The Kuwaiti embassy has ordered its citizens out of Lebanon. Despite the fact that Kuwait is so-called a stout ally of the United States, they would not issue such a warning unless they had the tip-off that hostilities are imminent. Greece, Spain, other nations are following suit. Boys and girls, a war in Lebanon is not like taking Gaza and curb stomping Hamas. This will be far more severe. There will be a lot more consequences. And unfortunately, it does put the United States at risk of participating and intervening in the war and possibly expanding in the Middle East. There's your wild card for the markets heading into July 4th. And there is the insanity that we're dealing with. Economically speaking, I hope everyone had a fun week. Ulysses, how was your week, and what do you wish to talk about tonight? Because I think I left a lot on the table for you.
Yeah, there's more than meat on the bones to pick over that. I'm doing good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there and making it happen. But I tell you what, this real estate situation is getting more public exposure in the local news and national news, I think, for residential and commercial, is the big shocker that no one wants to talk about, because it's like we don't talk about that member of our family, so let's not bring it out in public. You know what I'm saying?
I do. I think that is something that everybody is very uncomfortable with. I'll throw a chart up. I've been throwing some charts up and links, especially to the Liberty Street Economics blog, which goes into depth into what you covered regarding the, shall we say, systemic nature or relationship between banks and non-bank institutions. But I'm throwing another one up here, which is the recent earnings from Loan Depot. And Loan Depot services and is a lending partner to several home builders, and they have been posting losses for quite some time now. And I think it's indicative of the situation of having to buy down rates and having loans that are yielding less than what the market is calling for. And so that's an added pressure both on the non-banking system and the banking system. And it's part and parcel to what's happening in real estate, which is the price of your average home right now is out of reach for more than 50% of United States home buyers. And that has created a situation where sales are slumping, inventory is rising, and lending is contracting. I'll be sharing some more charts as well regarding the volume, dollar volume of asset transactions regarding mortgages, and it is not a pretty picture. In fact, it's all part and parcel to being recessionary, and I think that we're starting to see a lot of the lag effects take hold of higher federal funds rate.
Well, I'm looking at something else that's occurring parallel to that, and it's not just a Florida phenomenon, although we're, as usual, ground zero. The investors are starting to bail on their homes, their rental properties that they will rent. They get the first year, maybe the second, and then they can't rent it out at a higher price. And we saw the example that Tricia posted up on the MacroEdge Team and posted on her follow. And Tricia, Florida Sun, if you're not following her, Melody, and Amy Nixon are three of the best as far as residential real estate goes. You must follow those folks on X. Those girls do a fantastic job. Those ladies have kept a lot of us informed above and beyond. And a shout-out to Rudy and Melody for their program today. It was excellent. The key thing that I'm noticing about this is that everyone's ignoring that when they can't rent the house out, Ulysses, they're having to discount the house. And what people don't realize, if an investing firm, company, private equity group, et cetera, takes a home and discounts it 25, 30, 40%, it impacts the other property values in that neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to take a second just to second that everybody go give them a follow. Absolutely wonderful content that all three of them put out, and brilliant people. So please check out the works of Melody, Tricia, and Amy, and highly recommend all three of them that you do that. But to your point, yes, we are starting to see a lot of the single-family home rental outfits are becoming net sellers of properties. And this is kind of a subject that really is sensitive for a lot of people. And I understand why there's been so many calls to regulate the market and the industry to prevent single-family homes from being purchased by institutional firms. But I think what we're seeing play out is the natural end cycle of that, which is if you're paying over and above, it's one thing if you're doing that for your domicile, right? The place that you want to live. And you're not doing it as this is an investment, I'm going to make money off of it. You're going to live there for a significant amount of time. It's totally different if you're doing this on attempting to extract revenue out of the situation. You can only squeeze so much blood from a turnip. And a lot of the single-family rental landlords that have gotten into the business in mass, it's been predicated either on taking the syndicated funds from limited partners and collecting revenues basically on an assets under management volume, much like a hedge fund, right? The 2 and 20. But the actual real estate itself can't support the increased costs that go along with increased insurance, potential disruption to rents. We have RealPage currently being sued nationwide by the Department of Justice for having basically alluded to create price fixing and increases in rents, and that is affecting the situation. My personal view is that a lot of these institutions are going to face more financial pain in the near future because of the basis that they purchased these homes in mass at. And it's just a matter of time before that plays out. Much like the lag effect of increased interest rates, this is one of those things where it takes time and it's painful. And I know it's frustrating for everybody out there that wants to buy a home but is concerned about the current price or what they have to pay. But I do see that is going to resolve itself over time.
Well, my question, here's something I'm trying to put together. And I think we saw a lot of this with the quote-unquote rookie homeowners, especially the ones who believe in the, what is the best way to phrase this, the proverbial, hey, everybody can be a real estate investor, let's go to a seminar and proceed from there. You know who I'm talking about, too.
Yes, I do.
We see a lot of those vipers on X and Twitter, believe me, folks. You have no clue how bad it is. But they fail to take into account the big four, as I call them, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, at least in Florida and in other areas. And when you take on real estate as your own personal property or as an investment, quote unquote, Airbnb being a huge example, as Amy likes to point out, you have to deal with the four horsemen: insurance, property taxes, HOA fees, if applicable, and maintenance. And if you're not experienced in dealing with those four variables, they're not fixed costs. That's the problem. It's a variable cost over the life of the home, especially if you can't flip it before prices decline. You're in a lot of trouble. And I think we're about to see the rookies, just like 2007 and 2008, get taken out to the woodshed again. What do you think, sir?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'm going to qualify this. Anybody that follows my feed knows that I'm mostly bearish on real estate. I do believe that there are tremendous opportunities out there, mostly where nobody's looking. And despite my bearish outlook on it, it's a percentage and it's a group of real estate investors that I'm particularly bearish on. And unfortunately, a lot of that are first-time investors that had this notion that prices only go up, the costs don't go up with it, and it's something that I think a lot of seasoned investors, property managers, a lot of people in the space, or just anybody who understands economics and the principle of discounting cash flow, has probably had some version of comedy or frustration that they've experienced over the last few years, watching as people pay ever higher prices, but they're not taking into account that you can't just continually raise rents above and beyond the rate of inflation at will, let alone at extreme increases the way that we've seen in 21, 22, into 2023, and not also taking into account that costs go up as well. Your maintenance costs, repairs. I've seen pitch decks that they literally have zero reserves, right? So zero capital reserves to go towards future improvements. And we're starting to see that play out, especially in Miami with condominiums, where some condominium owners are getting hit with six-figure reserve requirements to repair things on their condos. Now, granted, there's some legislation that has expedited that.
Well, they didn't have a choice,
That's going across nationwide.
Yeah, but that repair was initiated because of the collapse of that condominium complex in South Florida, and they didn't have a lot of choice because I witnessed it in Sarasota with what's called the Dolphin Towers. And what happened was you have the concrete pilings deep, but we have what's known as limestone and soft sand soil. We don't have granite or a firm base, and I'm not an engineer. I'm just quoting what the people told me about it when I went there to watch all this. They had to evacuate the towers. They had to pump concrete 20 feet underground, which is an extremely expensive process to level the buildings and resecure and then reinforce the pilings because nobody neglected and thought, wait a minute, you're across the street from the bay, water seeps underground. It's fluid, and sand is not an obstruction to it. Well, this is happening all over the coast of Florida, Pinellas County, Sarasota County, Palm Beach County, Broward County, Miami-Dade, and a lot of people neglected this. And I'm going to tell you right now, the sneaking shock is going to be Daytona Beach in that area. There's a lot of older condominiums there also. To fix something like that is probably going to cost north of $70,000 to $100,000 per resident, and that's a major assessment for someone on a fixed income who bought a condo 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, Florida definitely has some unique situations. I'm going to post a photo because also construction is an enormous part of my life and what I do. And I have long been a proponent of engineering and taking into account hydrostatic pressure. I just posted a photo under the space of an example of what groundwater hydrostatic pressure can do to a pool. It can literally lift it out of the ground. Now, to your point, Florida has some conditions that increase both the risk and also the legislation that increase the requirements for those reserves. However, it's not alone in that. If you were to travel across the country, you'll find condominium associations that have similar issues left and right, and then you have issues that pop up. I'm going to throw an example out. In Minneapolis, there was a condominium tower that was built in late 60s, early 70s, and when they decided to allow construction next door, during the pile driving process, it actually cracked the foundation as well as part of the building next to it. And, of course, what do you do in that situation? We're experiencing a lot of buildings becoming, shall we say, structurally and depreciably obsolete across the nation. And the people that are condominium owners are going to have to deal with that situation. So condos are just one specific portion of the real estate situation that's going on right now, especially the ones that were built and they're well beyond their 27-year depreciable life cycle. And there's a reason why that exists in the tax code. It's because historically, after 30 years, a structure does not have its significant structural use or value any longer. It's not just a tax write-off situation or a tax depreciation situation. It's a reality of accepting that buildings have a life cycle and they need to be repaired on a routine basis. And the longer repairs go, the more that impacts their value. Outside of bizarre cycle situations like we saw from 2020 to 2023, from 2003 to 2006. It's just how it works.
And I'm going to add something to that in just a minute, although it's not my field of expertise. I just happen to be aware of it. But real quick, before we go any further, remember, MacroEdge.net, Ozone, 2-week free trial. Go to MacroEdge.net, sign up today, give it a test drive. Get the data you need to make smart investing decisions for tomorrow. You listen, I'm going to throw this out here. That also applies to a lot of commercial real estate, especially in the area of old shopping malls. What in the world are we going to do with these 30, 40, and 50-year-old shopping malls? I mean, we're bulldozing one in Manatee County and putting up new buildings, but realistically, what is the United States going to do with the hundreds of thousands of acres of old grass growing through the asphalt shopping malls that have no resale value? It's almost like they need to start coming up with some original development programs, some innovations to encourage investment, but it seems like the communities, especially in certain states, are pushing people away from investing and reinvesting in those communities.
You're asking us because I said this is the one field that I wasn't going to share my thoughts on without being paid handsomely for, right?
Well, let's tell you what, just do a chalk outline of the body.
Yeah.
We'll go from there.
I think as they exist, there's nothing but a chalk outline in most areas. But that being said, they're actually the asset class that I most believe that I could actually fix and repurpose. And there is an answer to it. And I'm not going to elaborate too much on it, but it is basically people that have these assets or are interested in these assets. Reimagine what malls were and what they're for. They are a destination which by nature is driven by people being there. How do you attract people to a location? So, in short, if mall operators are not running or thinking about their business as an event or destination-based location, they will continue to perish, and there is nothing that we can do except watch more and more of them go under. The everyday retail shopping experience is not what it was in the 1980s. It's not what it was in the 1990s. So if these operators and cities want to rekindle what they once were, then they need to change their focus and how they're looking at it. And I'm speaking from a fair amount of experience repositioning regional malls. I really do think there's a future for most of them with the right people and the right city cooperation. It doesn't even have to be incentives. It's just got to be the right people, the right mindset, and the right situation. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing that anywhere. Almost anywhere. I'm witnessing kind of the opposite, where people's idea of creativity in shopping malls is carving them up and saying, let's sell outlots. Well, that's not new, that's not creative, and now you're just reducing the value of the property, and you're creating a situation where it's subject to other people's whims and desires, and it might interfere with the overall property's performance. And that's where malls are at, in my opinion. I
can't disagree. In fact, the reason I brought that Big Lots story up with the going concern was if they go out, that's going to leave some major smoking holes in mid-sized to small shopping centers. And I mean smoking craters, folks. You're not going to refill that anytime soon. And one more aspect of this that I'm looking at as I drive around throughout Florida, I noticed that we're seeing problems with the empty banks, empty restaurants. California is going to have a real problem here in about a year with all of the empty real estate out there. I'm sorry. And I don't know how they're going to solve this problem without some really creative solutions. Mr. Joseph Middleton, would you like to jump into this, sir?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you guys we're bringing up shopping malls, just because in my area here in Southwest Michigan, we have a local grocer that recently moved into what used to be a JCPenney at one of our local malls. And we've seen, so in Southwest Michigan, in particular, shopping malls have just been going derelict for the better part of 20 years, but it always seems like they don't recover as fast around this area. So we have a local grocer chain. It's called Horrocks. And I don't know if anyone listening has one, but they're absolutely phenomenal. Took the entire space. I want to say there's almost 1,500 square feet and just turned it into an indoor farmer's market, right? And so far it's worked great, right? So if you think about a mall, you kind of have to look at, especially like Ulysses was talking, if you're going to try to repurpose a mall, what is it for? What groups of people will congregate there, and what kind of amenities does it offer? Usually with malls, you have plenty of fire exits. You have common areas. We have, sporting stores, bookstores. You have eateries. A lot of them have movie theaters. So you kind of have to look at who can get the most value out of that space, right? And you put shopping mixed with, with retail space for anything else, even just a food court. People are going to congregate there. So you have to kind of look regionally and say, what do people around here, what would they use it for most likely? You see cold storage and stuff like that. And like Ulysses was saying, you kind of have to get creative with some of this stuff. And I've seen and talked with a couple developers who had some really good ideas for assisted living for retirement. Is it hard to do? Probably, but it's an outside of the box idea that could potentially serve a good portion of local communities if it's done properly. So there are some things out there that are interesting floor plan wise. I mean, we've had a couple around here who thought about trying to do senior living. It would be perfect year round. We have winters here. You put shopping inside of it. You leave the movie theater inside of it. There's 100 different ways to skin that cat, but it's trying to find out how do you best suit the region that you're in, right? And we have huge malls out here that are Detroit. There's at least 2 of them. And when you're trying to solve a problem for property that size, you have to look at multiple different social groups. And I think that's where a lot of the problems come in, because you have to benefit a large variety of people. Whereas if you just put cold storage or something like that in it, you're changing the building structure for a specific purpose, and you have to look at other tenants and who wants to enter, who wants to stay. But there's definitely a lot of need for these old malls, because like you say, they're great to pull people to them. It's just, I think on a regional basis, what are you going to pull them for? And around here, especially where we're at, it has worked, putting in a farmer's market there. So there are some ideas out there, but there's a lot more malls than there are ideas. And anytime you look to a retail to residential, or like we've talked about in the past, residential conversions from office space, you don't know what you're getting into until you're already into it, and the cost is astronomical. So it's definitely something that I'm going to continue to pay attention to. But around here, we've seen some success with some outside of the box thinking on that.
We have a large shopping mall in Sarasota, Joseph, Sarasota Square Mall. It's one of the older malls. It's been around for 40-plus years. And it's on the south side of town in a premium location, less than 10 minutes from Siesta Key, 20 minutes during season. And the anchor store is now Costco. The retail anchor on the other end of it is JCPenney, and the rest of it is empty. So at this point,
yeah, so you're kind of stuck with like 2 stores on one end, and that was the same exact thing here. We had Macy's and Barnes and Noble.
Yeah,
so you just have this smorgasbord of space, and you have to try to figure out how to allocate the rest of it that will complement a larger area.
And I don't think people understand stores like Barnes & Noble are a zero. They're the blockbuster of this decade. And they're not going to be around much longer. Online book ordering is the only way to go because you can't find the books that you want, generally speaking. And what they promote are books that generally only the dumbest of people want to read because the New York Times says it's a bestseller when it really isn't. That's my political rant for the day. But
I'm going to jump in real quick just to say I hope bookstores don't go away.
Well, the funny thing,
bookstores are always important, right? Like, I remember when Kindles were new, and my uncle hated them. He hated the idea of Kindles because the smell of a book. He always loved to read the physical book, and my wife is the same way. She would prefer a physical book too.
Well, my wife hates me because I go to the used bookstore in downtown Sarasota versus going to a new one. It's old, it's musty, but I don't care. I can find the books that I want because I prefer classics and books that are more diverse. And obviously, if you've seen my bookshelf pictures, somewhat different from everyone else, except for maybe the group I hang out with here. But they're going to repurpose that mall. It looks like it's going to get reprocessed into an open-air mall. Costco is being persuaded to stay while they do this and turn it into a combination retail, residential, and restaurant open-air center. Now, that has potential in this area because it's needed. However, right now, and I'm getting ready to do a Melody-type video in the coming weeks, you are about to see the amount of condominiums for sale in Sarasota County, and it will blow your mind. And that's I think we have a saturation problem that's going to prevent any kind of conversions, bulldozing, or anything. I honestly, God, think that we're going to see a rollover in residential and commercial real estate that's going to hit the banks hard. And that's why my rant on the banks. The Fed doesn't want to use the severity terms that are needed to apply to the reality of the situation. But as Mr. Awesome and others have said, Joseph, we have a problem where we don't want to acknowledge the reality and take the losses now. We want to wait until they're too big for the banks to handle and have the taxpayers bail them out.
Exactly. And and just to touch back on the residential conversions, right? We all know the expense that comes with them is unknown until you're in it, right? They can be vast. But there is an argument to be made where, like you say, you get two cornerstone stores, a Barnes & Noble that is generally, let's say, profitable half the year, right? In winter, we have Michigan, we have winter. People don't go to Barnes & Noble in the wintertime. However, if you get a creative owner and you get a good structure behind it, that could be a common area for a senior assisted living. It's indoors, it's safe, there's plenty of space. You have another. It's got potential for activity for a group of people who could use it most, especially if you centralize it or anchor it with a farmer's market or a grocery store or a smaller chain. You can, per region and per need, you can kind of get creative with it, and I think you can solve some of the issues because you have all these empty storefronts that have back hallways, right? Fire exits. So you have clear exits in case of emergencies. You have clear entrances in case of emergencies. You have wide open space, handicap ramps, benches. A lot of them have a food court. There's potential there, for the right type of investment. But it's highly regional and incredibly expensive.
And I hate to shoot you down on this, but having become an expert on senior citizen homes and nursing homes, et cetera, not by choice.
Yeah, I am not. So.
Yeah, not by choice, believe me. The regulatory hurdles and the problem with staffing will blow your mind. Every nursing home in Florida right now is 25% short of staff. Only the highest paid, highest level nursing homes are fully staffed. Everyone else is struggling to find staff. They're using temp services, and I can tell you right now from personal experience, just like the hospitals, there is a lot of immigrants working in these hospitals and other locations to supplant because the young Generation Z doesn't want to get into the field.
No, and that's something that I can kind of I can see eye to eye with you on, just because my wife works for our local Veterans Affairs, right, and she works in palliative, so she works in a care for the long term, their for their final few months, right. So she has seen firsthand a lot of the staffing problems. I mean, humping overtime. There's entire floors shut down at some of our local hospitals We have certain things. And on the other end of that coin, on the other side of that coin, we have two new senior facilities that were built within the last 10 years that have a 3-year waiting list. And our elderly population here is exploding. It really is. So you have two problems. You have a housing problem, an accessibility problem, but you also have the employment problems like you're talking about too. And I've never seen, my mother just had a heart surgery last summer. And, we've talked about this in the past, but we're up there for her recovery. She got a nurse twice a day. She had an aortic valve replacement surgery, and her doctor saw her once in the entire 4 days that she was in there. She didn't get a shower because they didn't have the staff. They had half the lights shut off on the floor because they can't put people on the floor because they don't have enough staff to watch everybody. So I understand that completely. There is a ton of staffing problems going on right now.
Mr. Austin, would you like to pile in on this? Because when you look at it from a big picture perspective, it seems that we have a labor surplus of people who don't want to work, a labor shortage on the jobs that need to be done. And I'll throw this statistic out from a Bloomberg article this week. AI is currently only being used by 5% of all corporations in the United States. It's not getting the widespread adaptation that everyone thought it would. This is going to cause massive economic problems if everybody graduating college thinks they can become a professional gamer or a marijuana tester. I'm sorry, that's just reality.
We actually have so many marijuana stores here in Southwest Michigan, particularly in my county, that they're going out of business. There's some that haven't even opened. Their signs are up. They can't get rid of the real estate now because we are so oversaturated with it. Michigan legalized it, I think, in about late 2019. And it just exploded here. It exploded so much that they're all going out of business. It's crazy how many licenses were approved for stuff like that. It's insane. And the idea that people will hang on to their dreams of being a streamer. I remember in early 2020, everyone was a streamer. Except now, a lot of the e-girls and stuff like that have less clothing on, and there's a link in bio or something like that, And we've seen that before too, and we were talking about it in one of my posts, and I've gotten a little pushback on it personally from saying it, that the contact that I had, the stripper contact that I met, OnlyFans is killing that business too. It's this digital money making that's keeping people and allowing people to stay out of the active workforce that's going to end up suffocating everywhere else, and that's where they're filling gaps with some of the the immigrant workers and stuff like that. I think, anyways.
To your point, I think the mania chart, right? I'm gonna post it here, but really, the idea is the more that everybody's talking about a thing, whether it's real estate, it's crypto, it's dispensaries, it's .com, it's commercial real estate, whatever it is, the more you're hearing about it, probably a good idea to consider it a potential source of mania, right? If you're getting calls from your idiot grandma asking, should I buy NVIDIA, or how do I buy NVIDIA? There's a problem there, right? And it's not just the fundamentals, right? I mean, we can all discuss fundamentals and discounting cash flow and valuation, but it's the sheer level of how far the telephone game can travel, where people that would ordinarily never be involved in a situation, and it applies to real estate too, Airbnb, whatever. It's problematic when you put it in that context, where Michigan experienced so much exponential growth in growing marijuana that now there's shops that are closing. Not just shops, but greenhouses. I had a client that I consulted for about building a greenhouse there when it opened up, and they didn't take all of my advice, and they're facing a situation that's unpleasant now. sound fundamentals for very long, right? It's just cycles are what they are. Things go up and they come down, and every business that decides to try to expand exponentially realizes there's no such thing as exponential. Every time you grow as a business, there's pains that go with it. You might over anticipate it, and you have to cut some. And it's just where we're at in the cycle. But
especially with NVIDIA, do you think they had this conversation about Cisco before, or about Enron maybe, or these conversations have always.
I'm going to disagree with it. I'm going to disagree with Enron because Cisco actually produces things. Enron was projecting false production
that's
notifications.
True.
Yeah.
Good point.
that is a good point. But at the end of the day, it comes down to a shtick. They all had a shtick, right? NVIDIA has AI. $20 billion. You can argue that it's up. They're selling server racks and stuff like that, and that's great. But does that justify their $3 trillion valuation? No. But it's their shtick. They have that. They have the excitement. And as this concentration to NVIDIA grows and grows and grows, everyone starts to zoom in and go, what's moving markets? Well, it's just NVIDIA, And sustainability and fundamentals will remain out of the window as long as people are so hyped. And like you had said, 5% of corporations are using AI. I think it was 12% have implemented, and Target is most recently implementing an AI software to assist their employees in the operation of the day-to-day business. And what does that ultimately lead up to? Lost jobs, right? They're going to use it to fill positions that were typically held by actual people. And I've had an ambitious statement on, it's going to replace customer service. But imagine you call your carrier on customer service. It usually takes forever on hold, and then you get someone that might not really understand what they're saying very well. Imagine replacing that completely. I mean, there's potential for it, but that will always there's zero consumer level value to it as an individual user unless you're doing it for whether journalism, research, using it in a manner that's individual to yourself for your purpose. So until an AI comes out for every single American that's going to, it'll help you organize all of your subscription services and it's going to find all of them for you, or if it's a cybersecurity thing and everyone can use it, it's only going to be used to help optimize operations, which always ends up with less humans having jobs. Less people
I want to
jobs.
expand on that because I don't think it just expands or just winds up with less humans having jobs. I look at, we've already experienced AI with the internet. It's an opportunity for people to stop thinking and have somebody else do the thinking for them. And the more that we rely on things to do things for us, the less capable we become as human beings to do the things that we should be able to do. And the further away we get from being able to agree on what truths are, agree on what valuations are, agree on how things should function, agree on political ideology. If we are facing a situation where everybody's talking about AI, we're in the public sector of this mania, artificial intelligence, I'm asking, where is the physical, actual intelligence in this conversation? And why are we looking at it in the context of, it's great that we won't have to do things that we should be able to do as human beings anymore. And how is that actually going to impact the future based on what we're giving up?
Well, yeah, and I think there's no better example of that than our younger generations, right? Social media in general has done more to separate humans from other humans than anything else thus far. And millennials have kind of like a unique seat with this because we saw AOL, flip phones from not the very beginning, but from early enough where we've evolved through it. And you can see what it's done to people. And you see the awkwardness. Like if you're in a drive-through or something, like People, the cashier, they don't even look you in the eye anymore when they're handing you the credit card machine to pay that has the, will you add a tip on it now? The awkwardness, the social awkwardness is an effective deterrent to keep people from talking to each other. So you introduce now AI to that, and you remove another connection that a person would have to have with another person. It just separates us more and more and more, especially if AI is nearly as capable as they say it could be. I don't personally think it's really optimized for that. I would say a decade maybe, but it's certainly there. And we don't need more reasons to be separate from each other. Social media has already created enough space between us all, right?
Amen.
So AI is only going to make that worse.
Well, I'm going to sum the show up with this, and I'll leave everyone with this thought. And because we need to wrap it up now and move on. And remember, MacroEdge.net, sign up for the Ozone, 2-week free trial, MacroEdge.net Ozone. Don't miss out. Don't make a bad decision because you don't have all the data. Folks, I'm going to say one thing about AI because I've been around the block, and yeah, I don't know if I'm the oldest one in the room in this particular group that I work with at MacroEdge. It's a great team. But AI is deflationary until it isn't. Sometimes you have to bring the humans back in to clean up the mess that the geeks made and overpromised and under-delivered. Happens all the time in the software and computer industry. For MacroEdge Radio, this is John Galt speaking. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next Friday, hopefully with a special guest. We're working on someone. Good night now.